Released on the 27th of February 2026, Resident Evil Requiem is the 9th mainline installment in the Resident Evil franchise, following the beloved Leon S. Kennedy and a new face to the series, Grace Ashcroft. With these two protagonists, the game pivots between survival horror and action horror, blending the two genres the series is known best for while telling a story full of twists and turns with surprising revelations about the series' storyline thus far. With a setup like this, it's no wonder the game is incredibly popular with both Resident Evil fans and the general gaming population. After it was revealed at Summer Games Fest 2025, it generated an insane amount of hype due to the marketing strategies employed by Capcom, which continued all the way up until the game's release. Having an older character who is connected to the franchise's roots pleases the long-term fans, and having a new character whose gameplay style is similar to the more recent entries in the franchise pleases the newer fans as well, which led to over 5 million wish lists on Steam alone before the game released. Having all this hype surrounding a new release put a huge amount of pressure on Capcom to deliver a stellar experience worth years of waiting, and now that the game has been out for a while we can finally ask, did it deliver? Resident Evil Requiem confidently delivers on all of its fronts, from its lovable characters to its rich gameplay which builds off of previous entries and is almost perfected here. Almost everything Requiem does, it does well, and the things it does poorly are minute portions of the game. It sold 5 million copies in just 5 days, which made it the fastest selling Resident Evil game of all time, and is currently sitting at an 89 review score on Metacritic. The game deserves all the praise it gets. However, it is not perfect and has very tiny issues that all add up and stop it from being the best Resident Evil game. Unlike its predecessors, Requiem tries to combine two genres which have divided the Resident Evil community in the past, and its execution, while great and serves the story as well as it could have, leads to a mishmash of experiences which can't all share the spotlight at once. Having two distinct gameplay styles was a huge risk for Capcom to take, and in most aspects it really does work better than a regular game, but in a lot of other aspects it can make the player want more from one or the other. Still, Requiem executes it well and can confidently show off its features, with its biggest draw being its refined gameplay. Considering how different Leon and Grace's gameplay are from each other, it's surprising that Capcom was able to perfect both styles and improve upon almost every single mechanic laid out in previous entries. Starting with Grace, her survival horror style of limited resources and weak firepower is balanced excellently with the fierce enemies and extensive exploration she has to encounter. The inventory space is very limited at the start, which forces the player to think twice about which items to pick up, and increases the tension by potentially restricting access to useful items which could have helped Grace out of danger if the player picked them up. Of course, other Resident Evil games have had limited inventory space, but they're quite often generous with expanding your inventory and don't require a lot of key items to fill the space. Requiem, on the other hand, even though it has the same number of starting slots as most survival horror RE games, is very restrictive with its inventory and more often than not forces the player to skip heals and ammo in order to progress, keeping that core tension present while not feeling unfair at all. A new mechanic introduced in Requiem is the Blood Collector, which can collect blood from dead enemies to be used as a crafting material. This one item is amazingly well utilized and is another great addition to the survival horror gameplay. Having the ability to craft useful items from dead enemies encourages the player to actually kill the enemies instead of dancing around them and avoiding them like you do in a lot of other Resident Evil games. It also takes up another inventory slot, further pushing the player to decide whether to keep it or another potentially useful item, like a weapon. In Grace's sections, gunplay is of course limited, which is both a negative and a positive depending on the player's playstyle. Having only 2 different guns throughout the entire game limits Grace's firepower, which makes sections like the lab near the end of the game still feel scary, unlike other entries which give more powerful guns near the mid and end sections, which takes away most of the survival horror and turns it into action horror. Although many players were disappointed that you never really become powerful as Grace, there's still plenty of other tools at your disposal to fight the infected, like Molotovs, makeshift knives, and the hemolytic injector. There's also the Requiem, a magnum you get right at the beginning, before you even get your standard pistol. Having the Requiem available at the start is a neat flip on what's expected from a Resident Evil game, and it is so satisfying to use against the tougher enemies. It isn't overpowered though, as the bullets are incredibly limited and can only be acquired through crafting. The balance between all the weapons in general makes for an exciting survival horror experience regardless of which weapon you want to use the most, especially against the diverse and varied enemies. The monsters Grace has to go up against are always surprising the player, keeping you on your toes and elevating the fear regardless of how far you are into the game. Even the regular zombies are mostly all different and have unique traits and abilities, like the noise-hating zombie, the maid, and the surgeon. These regular zombies aren't easy to take down at all, swaying from side to side and fumbling around so you miss your shots and get attacked as a result. Even after Grace defeats the enemies, when left for a while they can come back as blister heads, further keeping the care center dangerous and never letting the player experience a sense of safety. Even though blister heads are really just recycled crimson heads from Resident Evil 1 Remake, they fit perfectly in this environment and are a good addition regardless. In Ark, lickers return which keep the endgame scary and maintain that feeling of being powerless. They're used as an obstacle magnificently and in a way which we haven't really seen before in the series, as Grace has to dodge glass shards and distract them with empty bottles. Another familiar Resident Evil staple present here are the stalker enemies. In the care center, both the chef in the west wing and Chunk in the east wing are always lurking around the corner, blocking any hallways and scaring the player off into somewhere they might not want to be in. Having these two really maintains that danger in the care center and has the player always keeping their head on a swivel. On the topic of stalker enemies, in certain areas separate from the main levels of the care center, Grace is stalked by the Girl, a terrifying monster whose one weakness is the light. Showing up in the intro, the basement, and the water treatment plant, these sections are some of the scariest parts of the game and keep the player continuously panicked while trying to escape her grasp. Constant surprises here are thrown at Grace, which really emphasizes the unpredictability of the game itself and pushes it above other Resident Evil entries. All in all, Grace's sections are the peak of survival horror, but those only take up half of the game's runtime. The other half, however, is led by a stunning action hero very familiar to fans of the series. Switching to Leon's gameplay, the player can make use of an entire armory of weapons to take down the aggressive and more threatening enemies, with almost everything in Leon's moment-to-moment combat being improved upon from Resident Evil 4 Remake. In regards to combat, the shooting feels insanely powerful, and the variety of weapons makes it so satisfying to take out some enemies with a handgun, then blast away the rest with a shotgun, not to mention wielding Leon's sleek hatchet. In RE4 Remake, the knife was fun for parrying, but only after a few parries would the knife break and you'd have to wait until you reach a merchant to repair it. In Requiem, they fixed this issue by allowing Leon to repair the hatchet on the fly, but it doesn't make it overpowered as it takes a while to sharpen it, so you need some space from the enemies anyway. Having the ability to parry basically everything, from basic zombie attacks to actual bullets, is good and gives a skilled player an earned advantage in combat, but it can get a bit easy when you have just one button which can negate almost every single attack. A better way to balance the combat would be to add a dodge mechanic similar to Resident Evil 6, where some attacks can only be parried and others can only be dodged. This would lift the skill ceiling and reward those skilled players even further. Although Leon's defense can lack in variety, the encounters and enemies he faces certainly do not. Throughout Leon's entire campaign, there are constant set pieces thrown at the player, ranging from dark stealth sections and chase sequences to avoiding mortar missiles and fighting a giant spider. These action sequences are very entertaining and don't really stray too far from reality, like some other entries in the franchise. Almost every area in Raccoon City has something new to show, keeping the player engaged whilst never feeling overwhelming. Even in these areas, the enemy variety is very diverse, as there's regular zombies, BSAA zombies, blisterheads, blisterborns, gas tank zombies, Gamma, baby spiders, lickers, soldiers, and even more. Most of these enemies are fun to fight, and the ones that aren't don't overstay their welcome. A minor issue with the regular zombies, however, are that they rarely stagger when using a pistol, which makes the pistol feel significantly underpowered compared to the rest of the weapons. This wouldn't be an issue if instead the other weapons got a larger focus, but you carry a pistol with you throughout the entire game and a majority of ammo drops are pistol bullets. Other than this, Leon's combat is excellent and close to the best it's ever been. When Leon's not in combat, however, is where the gameplay can feel lacking, as the exploration and resource gathering is often boring and very similar to games like The Last of Us. What separates The Last of Us from Requiem, however, is the persistent dialogue between its characters and the rich environments, both of which are missing from Requiem, which makes the downtime between combat areas very silent and visually bland. Also missing from Leon's gameplay are the treasures, which were present in both versions of Resident Evil 4. Having no treasures to look for and combine with others to sell for a higher price also affects the exploration negatively, but because there's other ways to get money, it's only a minor problem. Getting money to buy guns, resources and upgrades is done with the tactical tracker, which gives players money every time they get a kill. Just like Grace's blood collector, it incentivizes the player to actually take down the enemies instead of running past them, so they can acquire more firepower and have a more enjoyable time taking on the more powerful foes. There's also another way to get firepower, which is crafting from the materials you find in the world. Crafting is better and improved upon from RE4 Remake, but oftentimes you won't find enough scrap to make the ammo you want and you'll be stuck with an inventory full of gunpowder you can't use. Another weapon present in some areas of Leon's section is the chainsaw, which you can't have permanently in your inventory and only shows up during certain set pieces. As cool as it is to wield a weapon that has caused so much trauma in the past, after the first rush of excitement you'll quickly realize the gameplay isn't really that fun. All it consists of is pressing the attack button and swinging the chainsaw wildly until the game decides you've had enough, which is very underwhelming considering how it was shown in the marketing. Something not really shown in the marketing at all are the bosses Leon has to go up against. These boss fights are a great test of mechanics and honestly some of the best in the series. The Tyrant is a fun remix of the 5 from RE2, the Titan Spinner is very frightening and hectic, Chunk is a claustrophobic yet engaging battle, and Gideon is a huge spectacle which pushes the best out of the player. All of these battles require different weapons and unique styles of combat to succeed, really encouraging the player to utilize different playstyles and get out of their comfort zone. Almost everything in Leon's gameplay is improved upon from previous entries, but the aspects that aren't can leave a gaping hole that not even Grace's sections can fill. In general, the gameplay is amazing and debatably the peak of each respective gameplay style. For both characters, having the option to change perspectives on the fly gives a lot of player freedom in how they want to experience the game, while not feeling forced as there's benefits to both perspectives. On another note, before release, switching back and forth between Leon and Grace was the main highlight in the marketing, and considering the original Resident Evil 2 had its zapping mechanic, many speculated that something similar would be present in Requiem. Unfortunately, there's only one time in the entire game that anything like that happens, when Grace gets stuck in the basement and Leon can roam around the care center for a bit, killing the enemies Grace may have left and taking some loot for himself. Considering this is near the start of the game, most assumed it would be built upon further and your decisions with one character would affect the other. This is not the case, which is very disappointing considering the focus on the dual protagonists and how they interact with one another. Returning from previous entries, however, are challenges, which provide rewarding incentives to go back into the game after beating it. These challenges are a good mix of difficult and fun, with costumes, special weapons, and bonus items given as the reward for completing them. Although they're far from the best in the series, they're still a great addition to an already content-packed video game. Speaking about content, an unnecessary time filler in Resident Evil Requiem are the many scripted sequences. Scripted sequences in video games aren't inherently bad, but the ones in Requiem get very boring after the first playthrough and drag the following replays. The intro, the orphanage, the bike chase, and the underground research facility section are all very restrictive in how you approach them, and are the worst parts of both the first playthrough and the many subsequent ones. Regardless, the rest of Leon and Grace's gameplay are phenomenal and highlight another great feature of Resident Evil Requiem, its exploration. Like many other Resident Evil entries, Requiem introduces another iconic location to the series, the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center. This is where a majority of Grace's gameplay takes place and a minor part of Leon's. Exploring the care center as Grace is both satisfying and terrifying at the same time, as you use the key items you found previously to unlock new and unfamiliar areas. These key items are placed excellently and don't break any immersion, as they're often located in realistic spots, exactly where they might end up in real life. The layout itself is also fantastic and easy to navigate once you've become familiar, while never being too linear or straightforward. The narrow hallways and tightly spaced rooms give Grace little to no breathing room, which accentuates that claustrophobia and panic when being chased by an enemy. It's not completely narrow though, and still has plenty of rooms where you can avoid an enemy by running around an object in the center of the room. This has been a common staple in Resident Evil games for a while now, and having a building type that usually has small rooms in real life should have been a reason to ditch this trend, but Requiem continues it and gives an easy way out of combat when it should be constantly applying pressure. Despite this one flaw, everything else about the care center is well designed, and there's no doubt it will become another prominent setting in the Resident Evil series. Although Leon explores the care center for a little bit, the majority of his gameplay is set in the remains of Raccoon City. This section of the story is divided, mostly taking place in the east of the city and then moving towards the center, where the RPD resides. Starting with the biggest section of the two, Raccoon City East is a large and open explorable area, with 3 key items being needed to progress, just like in the care center. Leon moves from building to building getting these key items, using the streets to navigate and prominent landmarks to find his way. The design of Raccoon City East isn't as strong as the care center, both visually and practically, as the aesthetic of the entire location isn't anything to write home about, and the wide and often empty roads only exist to get Leon from A to B. Once Leon arrives at these smaller, more focused areas, the level design shines and makes up for that lack in traversal. These combat arenas are all quite diverse and offer new and engaging combat experiences which the series has never seen before. The underground subway is very dark and ominous, giving Leon sections a horror feel. The fallen building is very high and acrophobic, which gives way to new gameplay mechanics, and the missile section will have Leon frantically finding cover in the desecrate ruins of a rooftop. All of these areas are a delight to play through, and the uniqueness of them all really separate this game from the others. Once Leon gets through Raccoon City East and has a run-in with Gideon, we reach the Raccoon Police Department, a returning location from the series past. Despite its familiarity, Requiem remixes the RPD and provides some interesting changes to surprise the player, whilst not being too far different from what it used to be. Seeing the gorgeous and beautifully designed building reduced to rubble is quite the difference, and the layout of the building reflects that. Hallways and passages which were once open are now closed, and the rooms themselves have some new interesting secrets to uncover. Even the tyrant chase baits the player into familiar passageways and then forces them to retreat. The RPD is exceptional and, like the care center, really shows what the design team at Capcom can do with their indoor environments. After the RPD, both Grace and Leon meet at Ark, another lab situated under Raccoon City. This lab, despite being very visually similar to the labs from RE2 and 3 Remake, is an enjoyable final stretch near the end of the game. In Grace's portion, its layout is slightly linear, although it is quite small and only has 3 or 4 significant rooms. In Leon's portion, it's linear like all of the others, but the combat arenas got a decent upgrade to make way for the new kinds of enemies he has to face. As good as the lab is, it's just so incredibly small compared to the rest of the game and could have been utilised a lot more to expand on the gameplay. New enemies and mechanics are introduced here, but they stick around for only an hour of playtime. If they extended the areas and gave the Grace portion an expanded layout, it would have balanced it out better with the rest of the game and contradicted the notion that Resident Evil games fall off in the third act. Still, the lab is far from bad and a nice change from the rest of the explorable areas in the game. Sprinkled throughout the whole game are 25 Mr. Raccoon collectibles, which give a fun side challenge to complete separate from the main story. They're very satisfying to destroy, but most of them are so easy to find and are placed right out in the open in the player's line of sight, not to mention the loud rattling noise they make. The ones that aren't obvious, however, are stupidly impossible to find without a guide, such as the one all the way to the far left in the Care Center sniper sequence, and the one on a random bridge in Raccoon City. Because these aren't a part of the main progression, it's not too frustrating to miss a few, and you can always come back in future playthroughs to pick up the ones you missed. In the main story, however, there are of course many battle arenas and chase sections, which isn't a problem usually, but the way some of them are set up is especially predictable. Moments like the garage, the gas station, the first soldier encounter, and the underground research facility all have the player pass through them before any action happens, which ruins any element of surprise because they're clearly designed to host an action sequence or arena battle. This only happens very infrequently though, and a majority of these segments are still quite surprising. Overall, the exploration in Resident Evil Requiem is truly fantastic and maintains the standard for quality established in the games that came before. Requiem's story and its characters are quite divisive, yet have interesting developments which push the series in a new direction. The new protagonist in this game, Grace Ashcroft, is an FBI agent tasked with investigating a string of dead bodies all killed from the same infection. This leads to her getting caught in a series of unfortunate events unlike anything she's ever encountered before. As a person, Grace is very timid and shy, shown immediately to us in the intro and flashbacks. She stutters her speech and struggles to maintain eye contact, really emphasizing her recluse nature and showing how any scared person would react in the situation she's in. She's not dumb, however, and is always making use of her intelligence in brilliant ways not any regular person would think of. She's characterized excellently by her actress, with her small body movements and shooken posture really demonstrating the distress and conflict within her, even though the previously mentioned stuttering can get very repetitive at times. Grace isn't completely terrified though, and is very likable as her kind nature and willingness to care for others often gets her in even worse circumstances. Throughout her story, she gains a lot of confidence and grows exponentially as a person due to her traumatic experiences and the relationships she forms with those around her, like Leon S. Kennedy. Leon is a DSO agent who tries to track Grace down and find out the truth of his sudden infection. As we know, Leon isn't new to any of this and is relentlessly helping Grace to avoid danger. With his snappy one-liners and confident manner, he has already grown from the person he used to be and is far from the rookie cop we saw in Resident Evil 2, even though he still possesses trauma from the events in 1998. Just because he's a cool action hero doesn't mean he's careless, as we see him constantly looking after Grace and making sure that this time he makes a difference, which is quite compelling and makes you relate to Leon even if sometimes his heroism can get a bit unrealistic. Talking to Leon throughout the game, Sherry Birkin returns from RE2 and 6 to aid Leon in his endeavours. Requiem doesn't do much with her character as she only shows up briefly and through audio, so she's basically another Hunnigan with nothing extra added to work her into her own character. Being looked after by both Grace and Leon is Emily, a blind girl stuck in a prison cell in the care center. Both the player and the characters don't know if this girl is harmless or dangerous, and her soft nature constantly has us going back and forth between the two. Eventually, due to Grace's natural compassion for others, she rescues Emily and we find out that despite being kind-hearted, she was experimented on, which causes her to mutate into a vile creature. This back and forth of is Emily evil is great and provides another mystery for the player to uncover, on top of all the others in the story. The one responsible for Emily's mutation is Dr. Victor Gideon, a scientist who kidnaps Grace at the beginning and is the main antagonist throughout Resident Evil Requiem. Gideon is an intimidating presence throughout due to his tall nature and strength, and he's always stealing the spotlight in whatever scene he's in. His design is awesome, from his goggles to his long coat, which gives him a look very unique to this game, not to mention his horrifying smile. Apart from his design, as a character, Gideon works as well as he needs to, but leaves a lot to be desired. Most of his character just consists of trying to lure Grace into his plan, and when he's not doing that, he's acting all mysterious. Not terribly written, but just underutilized, and despite him being the main antagonist, he only shows up a very select few times. Besides Gideon, his partner and secondary antagonist of the game, Zeno, is definitely an interesting choice of character. When he's revealed halfway through the game, many people assumed that Albert Wesker somehow survived considering he's cheated death before. But no, this is a completely new character with a similar haircut, similar glasses, and similar powers. It's never explained where he got his powers or why he seems to have the same T-virus infection that Leon and Sherry have, and right when you think it's about to get revealed, he gets murdered by Gideon. So he shows up for around half of the game and is built up to be an important figure, only to get killed at the end and leave almost no impact on the story or even the franchise lore. Truly a waste of a character that no one will miss.
Well done.
Now onto the plot of Resident Evil Requiem, which, as much as it's retconning previous events, is still very interesting and unique. It's not completely unique like Resident Evil 7 was, and still has a lot of connecting tissue with almost every main entry in the franchise. Considering the entire story revolves around the mysterious infection plaguing survivors of Raccoon City, it is legitimately never explained how or why these people are infected with the T-virus. It's just a meaningless device only used to push the plot forward and give Leon some more involvement in the story. Another thing not explained enough in the story is Spencer's experiments and the lead up to him adopting Grace. All of the orphanage sequence seems like it wants the player to believe that Grace is the one we play as, and even Grace herself believes it considering she looks like a child version of her. But the dates shown don't line up with how old Grace is currently, and the child also looks a lot like Emily. This is just confusing, although it does make sense later in the game once you figure out it wasn't actually Grace, but just one of Spencer's experiments. Spencer himself has been slightly retconned, as now he regrets his actions which led to the destruction of Raccoon City, when other games say completely otherwise. This switch up leads to Spencer adopting a child, which turns out to be Grace, who we thought was Alyssa's biological daughter. A cool twist, but mostly ruined because of both the confusion of who the girl in the orphanage is and what we know about Oswald Spencer before this game. A twist actually done well is the reveal about Elpis, an enigma teased throughout the entire game which Gideon and Zeno are trying to understand with the help of Grace. Being kept in an underground lab underneath Raccoon City and locked behind a passcode, it's assumed to be another virus, one capable of creating a bioweapon at a scale big enough to throw the world order into chaos. However, it's actually a cure for any progenitor virus-based infections, which was surprising considering what we knew about Spencer and the extent of his other experiments. Most players would not have assumed it's a cure, and the decision you have to make near the end reflects how much you've been paying attention. This crucial decision, to destroy Elpis or release Elpis, is the climax of the story, but is ultimately lacking in its execution and is utterly pointless. If you release Elpis, you get the canon ending which brings forth a final boss for Leon to fight and a victory for all of our protagonists. On the other hand, destroying Elpis leads to Leon's death and an anticlimactic ending with almost no plot threads being resolved. Then, after the credits, you're presented with the option to rewind and see out the other choice. Given that there's no extra boss fight in this ending and nothing is resolved for our characters, it's basically a what if scenario to see what would happen, instead of a fully committed alternate ending to the game. Back to the canon ending, it's revealed that Emily survived her mutation, which feels a bit cheap and undeserved. As much as we'd like to see things go well for our protagonists, having literally everything be resolved for them, even when it doesn't make sense, is too far and negatively affects the story, especially considering how many people have survived the mutation like this before. Another thing taken too far is the amount of fan service. It's more than okay to have fan service here and there, especially when your game is revisiting old locations and story beats, but the constant reminders of the past and returning legacy characters gets old after a while. Zeno looking like Wesker, Hunk fighting Leon, Barry being mentioned, Lickers returning, the Tyrant returning, the RPD returning, the Orphanage returning, and even Tofu returning all could have been removed and nothing grand would have been changed. Some of them are nice additions, but there are far too many, which makes the game feel a bit cheap sometimes. Back to the story, in general it is very interesting and engaging. Both the cutscenes and gameplay help with that, not to mention all of the files you can find and the environmental storytelling which adds so much lore to the series. Despite some poor writing decisions and pointless characters, the story overall is better than a lot of other Resident Evil games and keeps its pace right until the very end. Debuting in 2017 with the release of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, the RE engine, short for Reach for the Moon engine, is the proprietary game engine used by Capcom in all of their modern titles, not just Resident Evil. This engine excels at indoor spaces, volumetric lighting, and texture work which is shown off no better than in Resident Evil Requiem. The artistry and attention to detail is unbelievable here, like with the character's hair and sweat, the modelling of the furniture, the blood and fire effects, and even the clutter in little side areas most players might miss. The lighting, improved by newly implemented path tracing, is the best it has ever been and gives every single environment its own identity while still looking incredibly realistic. Even the animations, whether it's the motion captured humans or the fast moving and disgusting creatures, are excellent and really immerse the player along with every other detail. Little things like reloading and the shaking of the character's hands are refined to a T and push so much realism, not to mention the way many of the monsters move around and attack the player. It's not just the engine details though, as even the cinematography throughout the entire game rivals some of the greatest TV shows and movies. Almost every single cutscene has an awe-inspiring shot which considerably elevates Requiem over most other video games. Speaking about other games, a huge complaint about not just other Resident Evil entries, but video games in general is the way they guide and direct the player. Things like RE4 Remake's yellow paint or something as simple as waypoints can oftentimes break immersion to a significant degree. On the contrary, Requiem considerably improves the way it guides the player, using small environmental details and common game design principles to push the player in one direction or another. Instead of yellow paint, it uses small yellow stickers on breakable objects, and instead of waypoints, it uses lighting to highlight a point of interest. The only part that it doesn't improve on are the prominent red barrels, which obviously explode, like almost every other action game ever made. Furthermore, the character designs for almost everyone in the main cast are all fantastic. Although Grace doesn't have much going for her, Leon picks up the slack with his dark clothes and grisly look. Gideon is the star of the show as discussed before, but Xeno is just a recycled Wesker design with nothing much newly added. Even the various creatures are all so well crafted and are terrifying from just their look alone. All of these aspects of Requiem combine to create one of the best looking games of the last few years, not even to mention the performance of the game. Requiem is painstakingly optimized and runs great on every single system it's on, regardless of the system's power. On PC, even the highest settings are as smooth as butter, only dipping down in maybe one or two intense moments where there's a multitude of effects and enemies. On PS5 and Xbox Series, both consoles run the game at a consistent 60 FPS while looking sharp and almost to the level of max graphics on PC. Now for the Nintendo Switch 2, which was Capcom's first new release for the platform. Despite being on a handheld, Requiem is always pushing 60 FPS and looking good while doing so, though it does dip down to the 50s and 40s in more sections than other platforms. Still, for a device smaller than any of the other systems it's on, it plays amazingly and is honestly the best looking game on the Switch 2 that runs as well as it does. All up, Resident Evil Requiem is the best looking Resident Evil game to date, and it should be looked at by other developers as the target for what a AAA game should look like. Before release, Requiem was shown off at multiple gaming events, presenting a demo for people to play as a sneak peek into what the game would be like. After these events, considering the immense positive feedback, most assumed this demo would come to digital platforms so that everybody could experience it at home. This was not the case, which was really surprising considering Capcom has publicly released at least one demo for every single upcoming Resident Evil game since all the way back in 2009 with Resident Evil 5. There's no concrete reason stated why Capcom didn't release a public demo, but many have speculated it was to maintain hype and avoid potential spoilers. Still a bit disappointing considering how unique this game is. Another disappointing mention is the lack of accessibility options within the game. Compared to other games of its size, Requiem has almost no accessibility options, and the ones it has are very limited and are the same feature-wise as the ones which have existed for generations. On the bright side, how Requiem controls is very intuitive no matter what controller you use. With both a standard controller and mouse and keyboard, all of the necessary controls are easily accessed and very natural to use. One small complaint, however, is that aiming on mouse and keyboard is a little bit too easy. On controller, aiming is of course slightly more difficult, but the way the game is balanced allows for those missed shots and inaccuracy. On mouse and keyboard, the aiming is much easier and very rarely will you miss many shots, which can make the whole experience slightly worse as you'll be blazing through the enemies and having a lot of ammo to spare. Sure, that might be fun for some people, but for most it affects the balance way too much and takes away from the horror in the game. Moreover, having the game released on the Nintendo Switch 2 day and date with the PC and other consoles is a great step in the right direction. Getting this game out on a handheld fully optimized and without many bugs or glitches is unprecedented, and to have it released to almost the exact same quality as other versions and updated at the same rate is truly terrific. No other developers are doing what Capcom is doing here, which hopefully will change in the near future due to the success of Requiem's release. In conclusion, Resident Evil Requiem, despite its medley of ideas and styles, pulls it all together and creates a wonderful experience that's effortlessly enjoyable. To be able to enhance two styles of gameplay at the same time while ironing out the issues fans have had with previous entries is a tremendous feat and should be worth celebrating. Even though the game has its negatives, its positives outweigh them significantly enough to put Requiem near the top of the franchise rankings. While not as finely crafted as entries like Resident Evil 4 or its remake, it takes more risks than the series has ever done before and executes them all to a masterful degree. Resident Evil Requiem is a remarkable horror video game, and is undoubtedly one of the best to fit the genre.